She had nothing but a barren field. Her stepmother made sure of that. The will was read in the front hall of Vane Hall, not in the solicitor's office, as was proper, and not in the drawing-room, where the good chairs were. Dorothea had chosen the hall deliberately. Marguerite understood that the moment she came down the stairs and saw where they had all arranged themselves, the solicitor with his papers at the high table, Dorothea standing beside him in fresh mourning that fit her too well for something made in a fortnight, and no chair set out for Marguerite at all. Her father had been in the ground 4 days. The solicitor read. Dorothea's portion came first, which was most of it. Vane Hall and its contents, the Dorset farmland, the London accounts, the carriage, then a pause, the kind a man makes when he knows what comes next and is sorry for it, Cold Harbour Field. In the parish of St. Ven, Cornwall, 1 parcel, stone-choked, 6 acres, unimproved. To his daughter Marguerite Vane, in fee simple. Dorothea's mouth curved. Not a smile. The shape a mouth makes when it has won. Marguerite said nothing. She had learned long ago that the front hall of Vane Hall carried sound in every direction, and that anything said in it would be repeated in the kitchen by nightfall. She stood very still and let the solicitor finish, and she watched Dorothea watch her, and she did not give her the satisfaction of a flinch. A fortnight, Dorothea said, when the papers were folded. She would require the room by the end of a fortnight. There was a coach to Bodmin on the Thursday, and she had arranged for the fare to be covered. That was more than the will required, she added, and her tone said she expected gratitude. Marguerite thanked her, clearly, politely, and went upstairs. She packed 1 carpet-bag. She was methodical about it. 2 dresses, a wool shawl, her mother's sewing kit, the copy of the Psalms her father had given her at her confirmation. She did not pack the miniature of her father because it was painted on ivory, and Dorothea would notice its absence and make something of it. She left it on the mantelpiece and did not look at it again. From her jewellery box she took 11 shillings. The jewellery itself she left. It had come from her father's money, and Dorothea would contest every piece, and Marguerite had no appetite for a fight. She could not win from a coach to Bodmin. The compass she did not leave. It was her father's, a small brass pocket compass, the kind a man carries when he walks his own land and wants to know where he stands in the world. The hinge of the lid was worn smooth. She did not open it on the way downstairs or in the hall or when Dorothea watched her cross to the front door with her bag in one hand and the compass in the other. She only turned it over in her fingers as she walked, feeling the weight of it, the particular warmth brass holds, after a hand has held it a long time. She did not look back at the house. The coach west was full and smelled of damp wool and a crate of something live that shifted in the boot. Marguerite sat in the corner with the carpet bag on her lap and watched Dorset give way to Devon and Devon to Cornwall, and she thought about 6 acres of stone-choked field in a parish she had never visited and could not have found on a map before yesterday. It was raining when she arrived, late October, and the sky over Cornwall was the colour of old pewter, and the track from the road to the cottage was mud to the ankle. The cottage was standing. That was the most that could be said for it. But before she could raise her hand to knock, the door opened. A woman stood in it, broad and grey-haired, with the careful look of someone who had been expecting either good news or bad, and had made her peace with either. Agnes Trevithick looked Marguerite over from the carpet-bag to the mud on her boots to the brass compass still in her hand. Then she stepped back and let her in. Marguerite crossed the threshold. The fire was lit. It was small and it smelled of peat, and it was the first warm thing she had walked toward in 4 days. She set the compass on the mantelpiece. She did not cry. Agnes did not ask where she had come from or what had been done to her. She put salt fish and bread on the table, poured water from a jug that had been warming near the fire, and sat down across from Marguerite with her hands folded and her face arranged in the particular stillness of a woman who has learned that silence is a kindness the talkative. Jory was less restrained. He appeared from somewhere behind the cottage door at the smell of food, a thin boy of about 8, with Agnes's grey eyes and a quantity of dark hair that had not been introduced to a comb recently. He stood in the doorway and looked at Marguerite with the frank assessment of someone who has not yet learned to dress his curiosity up as something else. "Are you the new owner?" he asked. Marguerite looked at Agnes, who gave a very small nod that meant yes, and also "mind your manners" in the same motion. "I am," Marguerite said. Jory came further into the room. He sat down on the stool nearest the fire, not at the table, as though he had positioned himself for observation rather than company. He looked at the carpet bag. He looked at her boots, which were still wet. He looked at the brass compass on the mantelpiece. "Have you got any money?" he asked. Agnes made a sound. "It is a fair question," Marguerite said, and she ate a piece of bread and did not answer it. In the morning she walked the field alone. It was not a long walk. 6 acres is a modest thing, and the early light did it no favors. The soil was thin and grey where it showed between the stones, the kind of earth that had been leached past patience. The gorse along the north quarter was waist-high and had the settled look of something that had not been challenged in a generation. 3 sections of the low boundary wall had come down entirely, the stones lying where they had fallen. She counted her steps as she went, a habit she had formed somewhere in the last fortnight when her mind needed occupation her circumstances could not provide. The north quarter took longer. The ground changed there in a way she could not have named precisely. The stones were different, sitting differently in the soil, darker in places with a quality that was not quite rust. She did not know what it meant. Back at the cottage she opened the carpet bag and found the deed where she had folded it inside the compass cloth. She read it once, then again, standing at the table with the morning light coming flat through the one east window. It was straightforward in most respects. 1 parcel, 6 acres, Cold Harbour Field, parish of St. Wen. Her name. In fee simple. The North Quarter had its own paragraph. That was unusual. It cited a surveyor's notation she did not recognize, a string of abbreviated terms, in a hand different from the deed's main text, added in the margin and initialed but not dated. She could not interpret it, but she did not set it aside. Agnes was at the hearth when she came back through. "Has anyone worked this land?" Marguerite asked. "In living memory." Agnes turned her head with the unhurried motion of someone who has been asked questions she has already answered in her own mind. "No," she said. "It has been called worthless since before my mother's time. The stone alone would cost more to clear than any crop would return. The syndicate men came through once 8 or 9 years back, looking at the coast road, and they went away again." Marguerite nodded. She folded the deed back into the compass cloth and held it a moment before setting it on the table. She did not tell Agnes what she had read. She was not sure enough yet to tell anyone anything, and she had learned something in the last fortnight about the cost of speaking before you were certain. But she kept the deed. The morning Jory stopped the Duke of Carwithen's horse. He did it without ceremony. He stepped into the road at the St. Wen crossroads and put his hand flat on the horse's bridle and stood. The horse, a dark grey animal of considerable size and opinion, stopped because the small hand was there before it could decide otherwise. The steward behind Edmund made a sound of alarm. He looked down at the boy with the kind of attention that does not waste itself on noise. "Well," said Edmund, "the woman at Cold Harbour Cottage has no wood for the week," Jory said, "and the north section of her wall is down." Edmund looked at him for a moment. The boy's eyes were steady, grey, like someone's grandmother. He was not frightened and he was not performing. He was reporting. "Who is she?" Edmund asked. Jory gave the question its due. "Miss Vane," he said. "She came from Dorset. She is the owner." Edmund reached into his coat and found a coin, and held it out. Jory looked at it before he took it, which Edmund noted as the behavior of a person who understands value. Then Jory stepped back and the horse moved on, and Edmund told his steward to ride ahead, and turned off the road toward Cold Harbour. The cottage came into view past a stand of bare hawthorn, low and stone-built, the roof patched recently with something that had not been there long. The wall, Jory had mentioned, was visible from 20 yards. A section of the boundary had gone down in a straight collapse, the stones lying in the order they had fallen. She was standing at the broken gate when he came up. She had come out to meet the sound of the horse, and she was holding a brass compass in one hand, lid closed, the way a person holds something they pick up without thinking. She looked at him. She did not curtsy immediately. She looked at him first, the way a person looks at a door before they decide whether to open it. Then she curtsied, small and correct. He dismounted. "Miss Vane," he said. She said, "Your Grace," and her voice was level, and he understood from the way she did not fill the silence after it that she was waiting for him to state his purpose rather than guessing at it. He stated it. He had heard the wall was down. He could send a carpenter. She considered this with an attention that reminded him of the boy at the crossroads. A family talent, he thought, that measuring stillness. "I would pay for the materials," she said. She named a figure. It was a fair figure. He had not expected that. Most people in her position either named nothing and expected everything, or named too much in an attempt at pride. She had arrived at the actual cost of dressed stone and a day's labor, which meant she had thought about it already. He did not argue the figure. They stood a moment in the early cold. The field behind her ran back toward a rise, the north section higher and stonier than the rest, the soil showing dark where the gorse had not taken it. He looked at it without meaning to, the way land commands a landowner's eye. "There is wood in the matter as well," he said. She said she had walked the field. She knew where the deadfall was. He read that as a dismissal of the charitable kind, the kind that does not want to be seen accepting too much at once. He accepted the reading. He said the carpenter would come tomorrow. He said nothing further about the wood. He remounted. She was still holding the compass. He saw it as he turned the horse, the brass catching the flat November light, worn smooth at the hinge, the lid engraved with something he could not read at this distance. She had not put it away. She had been holding it when he arrived, and she was holding it still. He rode back toward Carwithen House with her name in his head, and the image of that compass, and the figure she had quoted him without apology, and the way she had looked at him before the curtsy instead of after. He did not know yet what to make of any of it, but he found he was thinking about it still when his own gates came into view. The carpenter arrived at 7 in the morning with 2 men and a cart loaded with dressed stone. Marguerite was already at the wall. She had the deed in her coat pocket and a rough sketch she had made the night before by firelight, which sections had come down cleanest, which stones could be reused where the footing had held. The carpenter, a stout man named Shegwin, who had clearly expected to find no one useful on the premises, stopped when she spread the sketch on the cartboard and began to point. She knew the difference between a stone that had shifted in the frost and a stone that had failed at the base. She had helped the Vane Hall mason rebuild 2 sections of kitchen garden wall when she was 15, because no one had thought to stop her, and she had been curious. Chegwin looked at her sketch, then at the wall, then at the sketch again. "Right," he said. Agnes watched from the cottage doorway with her arms folded. She did not say anything. But by the end of the first hour, her arms were no longer folded, and by mid-morning she had brought out bread and tea without being asked. That was the revision of opinion. It happened quietly. The way most honest revisions do. Edmund came back 3 days later. He rode in from the east, which was not the direction of Carwithen House, and he came alone, and he had no stated errand. Marguerite was in the north quarter when she heard the horse. She was working through the gorse with a billhook she had borrowed from Agnes's shed, the handle too long for her height but serviceable. She did not stop working when he came up to the wall. He dismounted without announcing himself. He stood at the low section of wall she had not yet reached, with the repairs, and looked at the field. She let him look. "The north quarter is different ground," he said after a moment. "I know," she said. She cut another stem at the root and set it aside. "The deed has a separate notation for it, a surveyor's mark in a different hand. I have been trying to trace the abbreviation." He was quiet. She glanced at him. He was looking at the soil where she had cleared a yard of gorse, the dark stone showing through. Something in his posture shifted, a small thing, a stillness that was different from ordinary stillness. "This was surveyed," he said. She straightened. "So was the rest of the area," she said. "Agnes told me 8 or 9 years ago. A mining syndicate. They left without interest." Edmund said nothing for a moment. He turned to look at the far edge of the north quarter, where the ground rose slightly before the boundary wall. "His family has held this coast for 3 generations. She remembered Chegwin mentioning it that first morning, the way local men mentioned the fixed facts of the landscape. "The Pungaroseam runs northeast," he said finally. "It was thought played out. I had not heard anyone speak of it in years." She did not ask him to explain the Pungaroseam. She filed it. Neither of them mentioned the carpenter or the bill for the dressed stone. He stayed perhaps 20 minutes. They talked about the land's history, the way water moved through the lower field in winter, the difficulty of the coast road to Penzance in November. He knew the parish better than she had expected. He answered the questions she asked plainly, and without performance. When he left, she stood at the cleared patch and looked at the dark stone for a long time. Across the lane, Jory was sitting on the top of the repaired wall with his hands in his lap, watching the road where Edmund had gone. "He will come back," Jory said. Marguerite picked up the billhook. "He was being neighbourly," she said. Jory looked at her with Agnes's grey eyes. "No, he wasn't," he said, and dropped off the wall and went inside. Thomas Kahn arrived on a Tuesday, uninvited, with a letter of introduction from a Penzance mining syndicate, and the particular manner of a man who expects to be doubted. He was 40 or so, compact, weathered in the way of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, and he held his hat in both hands when he spoke to a woman, not from ceremony, but from habit. He had been given Marguerite's name by a solicitor in Bodmin who had been given it by someone else, and the chain of transmission had taken 3 weeks, and he was not apologetic about the time. She read his letter of introduction at the door while he waited. Agnes was visible in the passage behind her, not pretending to be elsewhere. "Come in," Marguerite said. She put him at the kitchen table and read the syndicate's letter second. It was 3 pages, carefully worded, and it said in its careful wording that the surveyor's notation in her deed matched a known indicator formation in this part of Cornwall. The precise phrase was gold-bearing lode country. It was not a small phrase. She read to the end. She folded the letter on its original creases. She set it down. She asked him 3 questions. "How certain are you?" she said. Khan had expected something else first. Tears, possibly. Or the particular brightness of a woman who has been told she is suddenly rich, he answered without the softening he had prepared. "Certain enough to survey," he said. "Not certain until we dig. How long to confirm?" 4 days for a proper assay of the North Quarter. Possibly 5, if the ground is worse than I expect, and if confirmed. She said, "What would the lease terms be?" He told her the quarterly figure. He was watching her face when he said it, the way he always watched her face when he said that number, because it told him something about the person. Marguerite's expression did not change. She looked at the letter, and then at him. "That would clear my father's debts," she said. "Not as a question. With income beyond," he said. She nodded once. She told him he could begin Monday. He surveyed 4 days. Marguerite did not hover, and she did not stay away. She walked the North Quarter each morning before Khan's men arrived, and each evening after they left, and she looked at what they had disturbed without touching any of it, and she counted her steps from the boundary wall to the rise at the far end where the ground darkened and the rock showed through in plates. 41 steps. The same every morning. She had stopped counting other things by degrees, but she counted those. On the 5th day, Khan came to the cottage with a written assay report and a draft lease. He set them on the kitchen table in that order, the report first, the lease after. Agnes was at the hearth. She did not pretend to be elsewhere this time either. Marguerite read the report. She read it fully, every notation, including the ones in Latin and the ones that were strings of numbers. Then she read the lease. She read it twice. The figure in the lease was the figure Khan had named. It was quarterly. It would begin within 3 months of execution. She looked at Agnes. "Agnes," she said, "would you witness my signature?" Agnes put down the cloth she had been folding. She came to the table. Her eyes were wet, which she did not seem to know or did not seem to care about, and she stood at Marguerite's shoulder while Marguerite picked up the pen. But Marguerite did not sign. "Not yet. I will send a copy to the Bodmin's solicitor first," she said, "for review. I will sign the final instrument when he is satisfied." Khan nodded. He had not expected that either. She set the pen down. She went to the mantelpiece and picked up the brass compass and turned it once in her hands, the worn lid smooth under her thumb, the hinge ticking open and shut once in the way it always did. She was not thinking of the compass. She was thinking of the deed in its compass cloth, and the surveyor's notation in the different hand, and the 41 steps she had walked every morning in the cold. Then she set the compass down again. It would be 3 weeks before the final instrument was ready. She could wait 3 weeks. The solicitor's letter arrived on a Thursday, folded inside a larger envelope with the Bodmin franc still damp from the road. Marguerite read it at the kitchen table, while Agnes set out the morning tea and did not pretend to be doing anything else. The letter was 2 pages and precise. The solicitor confirmed the lease was sound. The bequest was unambiguous. The field was hers as feme sole. The mineral rights ran with the land. There was a small note at the bottom in a different hand, a clerk's addition, stating that he had seen few instruments of this type so cleanly drawn. Khan's syndicate knew their business. She folded the letter on its creases and set it beside the draft lease. "Agnes," she said, "would you fetch Jory?" Agnes went to the door. She came back with Jory behind her, his hair uncombed and a smear of something on his chin, solemn in the way he was solemn when he understood something was happening that required it. Marguerite signed the instrument. She did it without ceremony, one signature in a clean hand, the pen set down after. She sanded it herself. Then she folded it and addressed the outer sheet to Khan's man in Penzance, and asked Agnes to have it carried to the post that afternoon. "Done," said Agnes. Her voice was flat and careful, the way it was when she was keeping the rest of it in. Jory looked at the signed page before it was folded. He did not ask what it meant. He already knew, or knew enough. That evening, after Khan's man had come and gone with the instrument, after supper had been eaten and Agnes and Jory had gone to their end of the cottage, Marguerite sat by the window with the brass compass in her lap. She had not opened it since Vane Hall. She had carried it and held it and turned it over under her thumb, but she had not opened it, not once in the 6 weeks since she had taken it from her father's study table and put it in her coat pocket and walked out of the house she had grown up in for the last time. She opened it. Now the needle swung, steadied, found north. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set the compass on the windowsill with the lid open and the needle pointing toward the north quarter of the field, which she could not see in the dark, but knew exactly where it was. 41 steps from the boundary wall to the rise. She knew it, the way she knew the feel of the compass cloth between her fingers. She left it there and went to bed. Edmund called the following morning. She heard his horse on the lane before she heard the knock, and she was already at the door when he raised his hand to it. He looked for a moment as though he had been caught at something. Then he looked at her face, and whatever he had prepared to say rearranged itself. "You are in better spirits," he said. "A legal matter regarding the field has been settled," she said, satisfactorily. He did not ask which matter. He did not ask what the settlement was. He looked at her with the particular attention she had come to recognize, the way a man looks when he is reading what is not being said, and then he smiled, briefly, and the morning was the better for it. Jory appeared at the corner of the cottage with a bucket, took one look at Edmund's horse, and went back around the corner without comment. Agnes was audible from somewhere inside, not close. They talked for perhaps half an hour at the door. He told her the coast road to Bodmin had been repaired at the lower crossing, which would make the journey easier if she needed it. She thanked him. Neither of them mentioned the compass on the windowsill, though she was aware of it behind her, and thought, without knowing why, that he might have seen it. He rode home through the Eastfield Lane, not the direct road. His steward was waiting at the Carwithen gate. The steward mentioned, as he had twice before, the conditional clause on the Carwithen townhouse. 58 days, he said, and left the sentence there. He looked at the lane behind him, though there was nothing to see. 58 days had not landed the same way before this week. Word of the lease reached St. Wen before Marguerite had told anyone but Agnes and Jory. Agnes identified the source within a day. Khan's assistant had talked in the Bodmin coach, freely and to a full bench of passengers, and the story had moved from there the way all stories moved in a parish this size. Agnes reported this with the composed precision of someone delivering a verdict. Marguerite listened. She had expected something of the sort. She had not expected the letter. It arrived Friday morning, 3 days after the lease instrument had gone to Penzance. The hand on the outer sheet was Dorothea's, which she recognized before she turned it over, a particular way of forming the letter V, deliberate and upright, like a woman who had been told in childhood that penmanship was character. She read it at the kitchen table. It was 2 pages, cool and formal, in the way of a letter composed slowly and corrected twice. Dorothea wrote that she had received information suggesting that Cold Harbour Field had been the subject of a recent commercial instrument. She wrote that she had consulted her own counsel provisionally, and that counsel had raised certain questions regarding the original conveyance of the bequest. She used the phrase, "conveyed in error." She used it twice. She did not threaten directly. She did not need to. The whole of the letter was the threat arranged neatly inside formal language, the way a blade could be arranged inside a parcel. Marguerite read it to the end. She sat with it for a moment. Not long. Then she took a sheet of her own paper and wrote one sentence directing Dorothea to the name and address of the Bodmin solicitor, who had the original will, a certified copy of the lease, and the legal review confirming both was sound. She did not explain, she did not argue. She signed it, folded it, and set it on the windowsill beside the compass to go with the afternoon post. The compass needle still pointed north. She had not moved it. Edmund came that afternoon. He did not know about the letter. She was fairly certain of that. His manner when he arrived was the particular alertness of a man who has heard something in the village and come to see if it was true, not the manner of a man arriving with bad news. He had heard about the lease then. Not Dorothea. They stood in the doorway. The light was going early, the way it did in November, the sky grey and close and the smell of rain on the lane. He told her without preamble that the lease being public knowledge would bring attention she had not invited, and that if Dorothea moved against her she would need a witness who carried legal weight. She looked at him. Someone who can confirm the field's condition before the load was discovered. He said, the repairs. What was there and what was not? A duke's testimony in a Bodmin hearing carries more than a mining agent's, if it comes to that. She understood what he was offering. She understood also that he had not named it as an offer, which was either delicacy or uncertainty, and she was not entirely sure which. That is a significant thing to volunteer, she said. He met her eyes steadily. Yes, he said. She accepted. She did it without making it more than it was, which cost her something she did not examine closely. She said that she hoped it would not come to that, and he said that he hoped so too, and neither of them said anything further about it. He rode home as the first rain came in off the sea. Agnes, appearing from the back of the cottage at precisely the moment his horse cleared the gate, said nothing at all. Jory, at supper, observed that the Duke had stayed longer than the last time. Marguerite said that was because there had been more to discuss. Jory considered this and appeared unconvinced. Agnes passed the bread and did not meet Marguerite's eyes, which was a form of commentary all its own. That night Marguerite counted 41 steps in the dark from memory, her hands still at her sides, the compass on the windowsill behind her. The field was out there, and it was hers, and the letter from Dorothea was posted, and there was nothing more to do tonight but let the things already set in motion move. She let them. The Bodmin solicitor's letter arrived on a Thursday, 2 pages precise and final. The bequest was unambiguous. The lease was sound. The mineral rights ran with the land. Dorothea's challenge had no standing, and the solicitor had attached the relevant passage from the will in his own hand, copied cleanly for Marguerite to keep. She read it twice at the kitchen table. Then she folded it and set it with the draft lease and the executed instrument, all 3 together, and left them there. Agnes said nothing. She put the kettle on. Jory came in from the yard with mud on both boots and read her face the way he had learned to read it over the past weeks, and he said quietly, "That was good then," and she said, "Yes, that was good." He came 2 days after that as well. On the first visit he arrived with the stated purpose of checking whether Chegwin's repair to the east gate had held through the rain. It had held. They both knew he could have confirmed this from the lane. He came in, which he had not done before, and Agnes put tea on the table without being asked, and Jory appeared at the edge of the room and watched them with the frank attention of a boy who has decided something privately. On the second visit he brought nothing, said nothing in particular, and stayed an hour. On the morning of the third day, Marguerite took Edmund out to the north quarter. It was still and cold, the sky the colour of pewter, the ground hard under the frost. She walked the boundaries she had come to know, step by step, and he walked beside her, and she showed him where Khan's crew had marked the survey lines with posts, and where the preliminary work had begun, a length of exposed earth, the color of rust where the topsoil had been turned back from the north face of the rise. Edmund was quiet in a way that was not indifference. She had learned the difference. He looked at the survey posts and at the cut line and at the field stretching south toward the cottage, and he did not fill the silence with anything. They stopped at the repaired section of wall. New stone showed pale against the old, fitted close, Chegwin's work solid in the joints. She ran her thumb along the seam where the old and new met, not thinking about it, just the habit of checking. Edmund watched her hand on the stone. Then he looked out at the north quarter. He told her about the townhouse clause then. He told it plainly, the Carwithen townhouse unentailed, which he did not need, but which his grandfather had intended for the family's use in the London season. The condition attached at the grandfather's wish, added to the estate instrument a generation ago, that he must marry before his 30th birthday, which fell in 42 days, or the townhouse passed to a cousin who had spent the intervening years waiting for exactly this outcome. He said it without asking for sympathy and without dressing it as more than it was a legal fact, a deadline. She listened. She did not fill the silence when he finished. Then she asked him whether he wanted the townhouse, or whether it was only that he did not want his cousin to have it. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that was not evasion, but something being turned over carefully, the way she turned the compass over under her thumb in the dark. He said he had asked himself the same question. She looked at him. He said that he had not had a clear answer until recently. She did not ask him to say more. She turned back to the wall and looked at the pale new stone in the old line of it, and the frost-stiff grass at the base, and the field behind them running down to the cottage where the compass sat on the windowsill with its lid open. 41 steps to the rise. She could have walked it in the dark. She did not count them now. She did not need to. They walked back to the cottage in silence, and it was not an uncomfortable silence, and that was the thing she carried indoors with her when they parted, more than anything that had been said. Dorothea arrived on a Wednesday, mid-morning, and Agnes knew about it before noon. She came to the kitchen doorway and said it the way she said most things, flat, direct, and watching to see what Marguerite would do with it. The stepmother was at the St. Wen Inn. She had taken a room. She had luggage enough for a stay. Marguerite was mending the latch on the window shutter. She finished what she was doing before she looked up. She said, "I expected this." Agnes said, "I know you did." Marguerite set the latch back in its housing, tested it once, and went to wash her hands. She spent the rest of the day in the ordinary way. She walked the north quarter in the afternoon and stood at the rise and looked out at the survey posts and the rust-colored cut line where Khan's crew had turned back the earth. 41 steps from the wall. She counted them without meaning to, and then stopped, because there was nothing to be afraid of, and the counting had never been about the field. She went back to the cottage. She took out the Bodmin solicitor's letter, and the executed lease, and the will passage copied in the solicitor's own hand, and she read each one through once to know where the relevant clauses sat. She folded each to the page that mattered. She put them in the pocket of her coat, all 3, and left them there for the morning. She came in a hired trap from the village, dressed in black wool, good quality, the kind of black that announced itself. She looked precisely as she always had, straight-backed, composed, her mouth set in the particular way it set when she had decided the outcome of something in advance. She found Marguerite at the gate. Marguerite had known she would come to the gate, and so she had been there first. Dorothea looked at the repaired wall, the repointed stone, the yard swept back to order. Something moved behind her eyes that was not admiration and was not quite surprise. She began well enough. The tone was almost reasonable. She said that she understood a commercial instrument had been executed on the Cold Harbor parcel, and that there were questions, as her counsel had noted, regarding the original intention of the bequest, that the field had been a token gesture never meant to convey the rights attached to it, that the income arising from such rights belonged properly to the estate her father had built. Marguerite let her finish. Then she took the solicitor's letter from her coat pocket and read aloud the will passage in full, word by word, in the clean-copied hand of the Bodmin solicitor. She read it without comment. She did not raise her voice. When she finished, she read the opening clause of the executed lease, establishing Marguerite Vane, feme sole, as landowner and sole contracting party. Dorothea's mouth thinned. The lane was quiet. The November light was flat and white and made everything very clear. Then Reverend Polglace came around the turn from the direction of the village with 2 parishioners at his side, Mrs. Carrow and her husband, who farmed the lower field. They were mid-conversation. They slowed when they saw the scene at the gate. Dorothea saw them. The argument left her the way heat left a stone at nightfall. Not all at once. Just gone. Marguerite waited until she was certain it was gone. Then she put her hand into her coat pocket and brought out the return coach fare she had set there that morning. Exact. She had known the amount. She held it out. Dorothea looked at the coins for a long moment. She took them. Reverend Polglace raised his hat. He moved on without comment, and Mrs. Carrow and her husband moved on with him, and the lane was quiet again. Dorothea turned back toward the hired trap without another word. Marguerite stood at the gate and watched her go. She did not feel triumph. She felt the particular stillness of a thing that has run its full course and stopped. She put her hand in her empty pocket. The compass was on the windowsill where she had left it, lid open, needle north. Dorothea's hired trap was gone before Agnes had put the kettle on. Agnes watched it from the kitchen window without comment, then turned and set the cups down, and said nothing further, which was its own kind of commentary. Jory came in from the yard and looked at Marguerite's face and asked, was it finished? And Marguerite said yes, it was finished. And Jory nodded with the satisfaction of a boy who had judged the outcome correctly some time ago, and was too composed to say so. Reverend Polglace stopped by that evening. He came to the kitchen door, as was his habit, accepted no tea, and said only that he had found the morning's business very clear, and that if anyone in the parish asked him about it, he would say exactly what he had seen. He raised his hat and left. Mrs. Carrow would say the same. Marguerite had no doubt. Mr. Carrow would say it fewer times, but to people who counted. She slept that night without counting anything. Edmund heard it from Agnes before she reached the cottage door the following afternoon. This was clear from the look on his face when Marguerite came in from the lane and found him standing at the kitchen table with his hat in his hands. Agnes was at the fire and did not turn around, which meant she had said everything she intended to say and was satisfied with the result. Marguerite took off her coat. The pockets were empty now. The documents returned to their place with the lease and the will passage, all 3 together. She hung the coat on the peg and turned and found him still looking at her, in the way that had taken her some weeks to learn, the watchful stillness of a man who had not expected to be moved by things and now was, regularly, and had not yet found a way to account for it. He asked if she was all right. She said yes. He said he was glad it had gone as it did. She said she had expected it to go that way and sat down by the window. The compass was on the sill where she always left it now. Lid open, needle steady north. She picked it up without quite meaning to, and turned it over under her thumb. Edmund sat down across from her. He said, "The deadline is 31 days. She looked up at him. He said he was not pretending he did not have a reason for saying it. She set the compass down on the windowsill and held it there with 2 fingers and looked at him directly, which she had learned he preferred to anything softer. She asked him what he wanted, not what the entail required, not what the deadline compelled. What he wanted, he said her name, once the way she had heard him use numbers, not as gesture but as fact. Then he said that he had come to Cold Harbor on estate business in October and found a woman at a gate who named a fair price, unprompted, and counted stones in a broken wall and held a brass compass like it was the last reliable thing in the world. He said he had come back several times on excuses that had not deceived her, or Agnes, or the boy, and had not deceived himself after the first one. He said he wanted the townhouse no more than he had said. He said he wanted this. The cottage, the field, the compass on the windowsill. Her. It was not elegant. It was the most exact thing she had heard in months. From the lane, just beyond the window, there was silence. Then Jory's voice, low and worried, asked Agnes whether she thought Miss Vane was going to say something. Agnes, from somewhere behind him, told him to hush. Marguerite picked up the compass. She looked at it a moment, then at Edmund, and she said yes. From the lane came a short, relieved exhale, followed by the particular sound of a small boy attempting to walk quietly over gravel and entirely failing. Edmund did not look away from her. He said, "Was that the boy?" She said yes. He said, "Has he been there long?" She said, "Long enough." The corner of his mouth moved. She had seen that before, the near smile held at its edges. She did not look away from it. The compass needle pointed north, steady as it had ever been. The engagement was not announced. It was simply known in Centauri. When, by the following afternoon, carried by Agnes and Jory, with the efficient goodwill of people who considered the outcome a matter of settled record and saw no reason to be subtle about it. Marguerite heard about this from Agnes herself, who reported it without apology. Jory had told the blacksmith's boy. Agnes had mentioned it to Mrs. Carrow, who had clearly needed no encouragement. By Sunday, the news had the particular quality of something everyone already knew, and was merely waiting for the banns to confirm. The banns were read by Reverend Polglace on Sunday morning. He read them in the even, carrying voice he used for things that mattered and wished to be heard clearly at the back of the nave. Jory stood very straight in the pew beside Agnes, and looked neither left nor right, in the manner of a boy exercising considerable discipline. Lady Ashworth arrived from Bath on the Monday. She came in her own carriage, with her own maid, and she had, by Edmund's accounting, prepared a thorough argument. She delivered approximately half of it in the front room of Carwithen House before Edmund said 2 sentences. The second sentence named what Marguerite had done at the gate with Dorothea, the reading of the will clause aloud in the lane without raised voice before witnesses, and the coins held out without triumph. Lady Ashworth had stood before her share of difficult moments in her time. She went quiet. She asked, after a pause, to take tea with Marguerite privately. Marguerite went on Tuesday. The morning was sharp and clear, the kind of December morning that made the light very clean against the stone of Carwithen House. A housemaid brought tea. Lady Ashworth poured it herself, which Marguerite took as a signal. What passed between them in that room was not reported to Edmund. He did not ask, which Marguerite found she respected. He had the self-possession to know that some conversations belonged to the people in them, and no one else. He found his mother afterward sitting by the window with her tea gone cold, looking out at the bare garden with an expression he apparently could not read, because he said nothing to Marguerite about it, beyond that his mother looked thoughtful. Marguerite looked exactly as she always had. This was what Agnes said when Marguerite returned to the cottage and Agnes assessed her in the kitchen doorway. She said, "You look the same." Marguerite said, "I am the same." Agnes considered this and appeared to find it satisfactory. Jory was at the table with a piece of string he was working into a complicated knot. He did not look up from it. He asked, in the voice he used when asking things he already suspected the answer to, whether Lady Ashworth had been very grand. Marguerite said she had been very direct. Jory said he supposed that was the same thing with duchesses. Marguerite sat down across from him and watched him work the knot for a moment. The fire was good. The cottage was warm in the way it had not been in October, when the mortar had been crumbling and the shutters had not closed properly and the cold had come in at every edge. The carpenter's work held. The winter could not find its way in. Now she reached into her coat pocket and took out the brass compass. She set it on the table between them, lid open, the needles swinging once and then settling. Jory looked at it. He had looked at it many times over the past weeks, and never touched it without asking. He asked now, seriously, whether the needle always found north. She said it always did. He considered this with the gravity he brought to things that seemed to him important. He said, "Then it's a reliable thing." She said, "Yes, it is exactly that." He went back to his knot. Outside, the December light was flattening toward afternoon. Somewhere over the north quarter, a jackdaw called once and went quiet. Marguerite left the compass on the table and let the needle point where it always pointed. 31 days had become fewer. She did not count them. The morning of the marriage was cold and still, the kind of December stillness that sits over Cornwall like a held breath. The sea somewhere to the west and invisible, the fields pale with frost that had not yet decided to thaw. Reverend Polglace did not drag the service. Marguerite had the brass compass in her coat pocket, lid closed. She had no flowers. She had her good dress, the one she had pressed the night before, on Agnes's table, and her coat, and her gloves, and that was enough. She stood beside Edmund in the small nave, and the winter light came through the east window at a low angle, and lay across the stone floor in a quiet stripe, and she said the words in the same register he used for them, steady and meant, and Reverend Polglace folded his hands and said it was done. Jory, in the front pew with Agnes, let out a breath. Agnes looked forward and her jaw was set and her eyes were bright and she did not say anything, which was how Marguerite knew she was satisfied, beyond what words would carry. Edmund took her hand when they stepped back into the lane. He did it without ceremony, the way a man takes hold of something he intends to keep. The frost on the lane had softened while they were inside, and the jackdaws were moving in the elms, and the sky, over St. Wen, was a clean, pale blue above the church tower. Jory fell into step beside them. He walked with the proprietary air of a boy who has been present at every significant event, and considers this his due. He had put on his good boots, and his hair had been combed into submission, though one section at the back had already recovered its independence. He said that he supposed they would be at Carwithen House now. Edmund said that was correct. Jory said he supposed that was all right. Edmund said he was glad to have Jory's endorsement. Jory considered this with great seriousness, and then said he thought Edmund had done well. All things considered, which Agnes received with a sound that was not quite a laugh, and was not quite a cough. 2 years on the North Quarter was still productive. Khan sent his quarterly report without being asked. It arrived the first week of each quarter, figures correct, projections cautious, and Marguerite read it at the desk in the room Edmund had given over to her at Carwithen House, the room with the window that faced west toward the far edge of the Cold Harbour margin. The cottage stood empty, but the wall Chegwin had rebuilt was sound. Agnes had moved to Carwithen House on terms she had negotiated herself, and the kitchen ran the way kitchens run when the person in charge of them has opinions and the authority to act on them. Jory, now 10, had been promised a position on the estate when he was old enough. He considered this settled and had moved on to other concerns, chief among them a complicated rivalry with the stable boy over a question of which of them could identify more birds by their calls alone. Dorothea had let Vane Hall and gone north to a cousin in Edinburgh. She did not write. Marguerite did not expect her to, and had not left a space for it. The brass compass sat on the mantelpiece in the west room, lid open, needle pointing north as it always had. It pointed toward Cold Harbour, toward the North Quarter, toward the lode that had been there all along, beneath the stone-choked ground, waiting for someone to look at the right notation in the right deed at the right moment. Marguerite touched it sometimes when she passed, not counting anything, not holding it against the cold, just a hand laid flat for a moment on something that had always known where it was. Edmund found her there one evening in the second winter, the fire behind her, the needle steady, her hand resting on the open lid. He said nothing. He came and stood beside her and looked at it with her, and after a moment he put his hand over hers. The compass pointed north. Outside, the sea was somewhere in the dark. Everything else was exactly where it was supposed to be. If this story has settled something quiet in you, stay a moment by the fire with me. There is always something on, and the door is never locked to anyone who needs a warm place and a tale told well. Until then, good night, and be kind to the people who keep on, the ones who carry the compass, even when they cannot see the north. You never quite know whose steadiness has been holding the world together all along.